Welcome back to Unapologetically Me. I am going to be talking about what an avoidant looks like. And specifically, we are going to be talking about the dismissive avoidant. This is something I kind of been talking about, at least the theory of attachment styles. And last week, I talked about my attachment style, which was a fearful avoidant. And I'll just kind of preview what that is. So there's an anxious person, avoidant, and then there's a combination, and then there's secure being ideal. The fearful avoidant, which is both, can flip flop back and forth to being avoidant and anxious. And in this case, what we're talking about today is more of the avoidant side. And an avoidant person usually, what they say is they come from a family or a household that they almost felt like they needed to fend for themselves and not have much dependency on um, like a parent who was present or emotionally available. So what happens is an avoidant shuts down when intimacy occurs. And that is just one type, I guess. It's not always the same reason. There's always a different reason for why avoidants do the things that they do. And they always look a little bit differently. But today I'm going to talk about my experience with avoidant attachment partners. And in the last couple of years, now that I've studied a little bit on avoidant attachment, I've definitely seen more of the signs of what it looks like. In the beginning, it's exciting and seemingly normal. But I think it's also one of the most confusing part of dating because they are so normal in the beginning and the shift doesn't happen until things start becoming more real. So yeah, like in the beginning they show up like a normal partner would. And then eventually you notice that they become somebody you really just don't even recognize as far as what they were from day one. And honestly, if you have any anxious tendencies, dating an avoidant will probably get you to heal quicker than you would expect. And the reason I say that is because you're kind of being forced to learn how to love yourself more. And when you're anxious, your goal is, I think subconsciously, is to find somebody who can fill a void. Essentially, you're just looking to find somebody that makes you happy when ultimately the goal is to make yourself happy. And I think an avoidant person teaches you that not everybody is going to be there for you the way you would expect them to. And I think people think avoidants are cold and distant and emotionally unavailable people, but really that's not how it starts. But I will say it is how it ends. And I'll talk about my first experience with an avoidant attached person. It felt insane in the beginning. It was very exciting. He was very romantic, freaking hilarious. He had a good relationship with his family. He was intelligent, very well spoken. And all of those things were very attractive to me. And I felt like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him as far as how it was portrayed. And it definitely wasn't surface level, it was very real. And I think that's what made it so confusing once the shift happened because it felt so real. And when it shifted, it almost like felt like it was a dream I'd had. because it was so dramatically different from the person that I knew. And in the beginning, it started out with some small changes that were noticeable, but not to the point where it was like a huge drop. I would receive less like good morning and good night texts. And at first, I just kind of chalked it up as, we were getting out of the honeymoon stage, and um, he was a busy person and just needed that time to himself, which I could appreciate because that's something that I always need, is time to just be alone. And so it didn't really hit me at that point. But then the I love yous stopped about 3 months in. And then it became where it was like I had to be scheduled in to the schedule that he had previous to us being together. And I just assumed, it was something that he needed to stay regulated, and that was okay. That was okay with me. Running a business and having kids and having a busy life was definitely something that I needed to focus on as well. And then after some time of the distance being more frequent, I started to feel like I was becoming more of a burden than I was somebody that was like bringing him peace. But the weird thing is he always made sure to tell me it wasn't me, that he adored me and he just needed this time because it made him anxious to not have a routine. And it had changed since we had been together. So he needed to be able to get back into a flow, but also include me when he had availability. And then what was really interesting was it became more difficult for him to even talk to me on the phone. Like it would cause him anxiety, or it would cause panic attacks if he had to take time out of his day to communicate at all. I started to kind of worry about him a little bit. I think at that point I knew that things were definitely not okay. And yet still, I never pressured him for more time, and I never asked him if I had done something wrong. I just knew that it wasn't something that was going to work for me long term if it were to stay this way. And so I decided to take a break and give him the space he needed, and also give myself the opportunity to really decide what I wanted. And here's the thing that we don't talk about enough. It really isn't that they don't care, it's that they care too much. And that scares them, because now there's something to lose, whether it be their freedom, their peace, their routine, me. So there's a huge emotional risk, and vulnerability is never an easy thing for a lot of people. But in this case, with avoidant attachers, they really try to avoid it at all costs. So instead of leaning in, they pull back. So an avoidant attacher is somebody that can be all in, and then once things get real, they pull back. Struggle to stay consistent once emotions deepen. They avoid conversations that provide clarity. And I guess in a way, they have one foot in and one foot out the door at all times. It's like they need space right when things are starting to feel the closest. And it's not always intentional, but it is consistent with an avoidant. So if you've been on the receiving end of this, it really messes with you. In my case, I developed a lot of anxiety. I had a really hard time trying to understand and be there. But at the same time, the space was me being there for him. So I had deep sadness for this person who I cared for. And it felt like a really empty feeling that I don't know if this person is capable of being in a relationship. So instead of losing myself, I gave the space. But at some point, I needed to address what was happening. And when I did that, it was too much for them, and it ended in a breakup. In that moment when it was at its highest peak of distance, I remember thinking, what can I do, or how can I be to make this person want to be with me or be happy with me? And then it turned into, is this person capable of meeting me where I'm at? And the answer was no. And that was where I realized it was over. And this is where ego protection gets mixed in. It's not always emotional unavailability. They're capable of having an emotional connection, but their ego doesn't allow it. Because if it's emotional overwhelm or if it's fear of rejection, the result is the same. So they create distance instead of connection. And unfortunately, with the avoidant attached people, unless they do seek help or heal their wounds, they will never be in a relationship successfully. In most cases, our avoidants don't want to get the help. They don't think there's anything wrong with them. So they stay stuck in this cycle, unfortunately. And I think that's why I have the most empathy for avoidant people, because they have so much love to give, but they're not capable of sustaining that. And I think what's interesting is, being a fearful avoidant, I can recognize how that feels because I have done it myself. It's weird because in my case, I lean anxious when someone's avoidant, and I lean, and this is in the past. This is something obviously that I worked on for a long time now. But I turn avoidant when the other person's either secure or anxious. So, in the case of being in the avoidant part of it, you're almost in a state of like panic, or you're in a state of flight. And when that happens, you don't actually think about how the other person feels. You're just trying to regulate yourself by removing yourself from the situation. So it takes a lot of time before you realize that you've made a mistake. And then you start to fantasize about this person. And then they end up being somebody that you might have thought of, either that's the one that got away, or in some cases, they're your unicorn. And I've heard that reference recently, and it was kind of funny because I don't have those anymore. So when somebody says that to me, it's pretty clear that they probably lean avoidant, because there's always this fantasy person that they had that got away, that they can never have or would never be able to sustain a relationship with. So in that case, it keeps them in a state of, oh, nobody's going to compare to that person. So I'm just going to push everybody away that isn't that. And it's really sad because I've done it, and to great people, probably healthier people than what I've ended up being with, honestly. And I just refuse to be like that anymore. It's so sad. The people that I look back on now and I'm thinking, oh, wow, really screwed that one up. um, so yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's kind of how it is. And so if you're experiencing this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're someone that pulls away, it's something worth thinking about as well. In the end, I don't want to focus on labeling people, because I do think everybody has a different situation, how they handle attachment. And I really think it's more of a helpful tool to give you a better understanding of somebody else who you cannot really understand or relate to in that way. And I think it's important that we aren't pointing it out to these people, because in the end, they're going to have to figure it out. They're going to have to sit back and say, why is this a pattern of mine that I can't fix? Or why does this keep happening to me? And eventually, if they hit rock bottom, or if they have their moment of, oh crap, I don't want to live the rest of my life like this, that's when I would hope that they would get some therapy or figure it out. Otherwise, avoidants are most likely the people that are going to be alone forever. Maybe they'll have some short bursts here and there, but it never is sustained. And so I deeply, deeply feel for these people. And by no means do I think they're bad. I just think they are lost and need to find their way back. So that concludes my podcast today. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again in my next episode.